I have gotten a lot of requests for today's game. Knack was one of the PlayStation 4's launch titles, one of the first PlayStation 4 games that most people played, was widely panned upon release, cracked multiple top 10 worst of the year lists, and is still regarded as a punchline years later. So naturally, being a widely reviled game that's largely been forgotten, it's getting a sequel next month. Knack really seems to be a creator's pet for Sony. Not only are they pushing a sequel despite a complete lack of interest, but they've made public statements defending the game. At time of publishing, the game's TV tropes page reads like a Sony employee wrote the whole damn article, firing off excuses for every criticism the game's accumulated and swearing up and down how good the sequel's going to be. It's really sad and desperate. My guess is that because Knack briefly, and I mean briefly, outsold Super Mario 3D World, the faint glimmer of success has Sony obsessively trying to wring this one-off tech demo into a Mario killer franchise. So while Sony gets ready to learn the Titanfall 2 lesson, again, let's revisit Knack, the original shitty PS4 game. The game opens with a tutorial explaining the mechanics. You have a dodge roll, a double jump, and a 3-hit punch combo. The gimmick of the game is that Knack absorbs blocks into his body at set points in the level, getting bigger, stronger, and more durable as the level goes on. The controls are smooth, though I question mapping the dodge roll to the right analog stick. Maybe this won't be so bad. Holy shit! Dead in 2 hits! Shit! Holy balls! Oh, this bodes ill. Balls. Damn it. Shit. Crap. F me. Zimbabwe. Shit. Frack. Jesus. Ass. Yeah. Not out of the introduction, and you already get a full view of the game's biggest, constant, glaring, pulsating problem. You have basically no health. No matter the level, no matter how long your health bar is, you are always fighting enemies that kill you in 1 to 3 hits with no help apart from rare health pickups that barely heal you. Get hit once or twice and you die, and the game quickly devolves into a battle of attrition where you desperately try to claw your way to the next checkpoint before the enemies kill you. Now, the game's entire premise is that you grow in size and strength as the level goes on, so that health bar constantly getting longer has to account for something, right? Nuh-uh. You start every level as Tiny Knack, fighting bugs that kill you in 2 hits. Eventually you grow so you can kill the bugs easily, and immediately the enemies get swapped out for soldiers that kill you in 2 hits. Gradually you find more relics to get even larger so the soldiers aren't a major threat, so then they get swapped out for robots that now kill you in 2 hits. So despite the game being built around absorbing objects to increase your strength, the enemies constantly scale up with you so that the combat and gameplay never change. No matter what you do, you are always getting your ass kicked.
Hello?
Yes, YouTube username DarkLordJadow1. I'm a representative of the Sony Corporation, and I'm here to correct your obviously erroneous review of our masterpiece, Knack.
Okay, there is no way you said that with a straight face.
It makes total sense why Knack dies so quickly. He's fragile because he doesn't have a solid body. It's quite obvious.
Oh, really? You want to bring science into this? Okay.
Knack is explained as being a floating orb that uses, quote, arcane energy to attract and manipulate relics, which are super dense metal cubes and spheres. The game itself admits that it doesn't know how arcane energy works, but it seems to control Knack's body parts like magnetism. You want to know what happens when you punch a dense metal block suspended in the air by magnetism? The block would just fall loose, land on the floor completely intact, and Knack could just absorb it into his body again. This even happens in one of the cutscenes. You can't hurt him. You can only temporarily knock a few pieces loose and then he reforms. If anything, Knack should be virtually indestructible. There is absolutely no logical in-game reason why you should die in 2 hits everywhere you go. Constantly getting killed is the biggest problem with the combat, but it's far from the only one. The dodge roll covers almost no distance and has a cooldown before you can move again. If your timing on the dodge is a split second off, or if you roll in the slightly wrong direction, you die anyway. And a lot of the enemies have overhead or area effect attacks specifically so that the jump or dodge roll don't work at all, or an enemy will turn in place to hit you even if you dodge. It's virtually impossible to fight the enemies on instinct and reflex, so the only way to succeed in combat is to to tediously memorize every single enemy's attacks and never attack unless you're beyond certain your target won't get a shot off. It's made worse by the fact that every enemy in the game has a longer reach than you. You have no ranged attacks, you're slow as crap, and half the enemies fire projectiles. You can barely fight ranged enemies, and they can shoot you to death from off-screen since you can't control the camera. Knack does have one aerial attack with a bit of range similar to Sonic's homing attack, but it's completely unreliable. Sometimes it'll nail enemies clear across the room, and sometimes it misses guys 3 feet away. Sometimes it'll turn a full 90 degrees to hit an enemy, and sometimes you'll miss a guy dead center in front of you. It's blind luck if this attack works. Actually, I misspoke. Knack does have one ranged attack, you just barely get to use it. As you go through levels, you break open sun crystals to charge what I like to call screw-off attacks that kill everybody in the room. But most levels they charge slowly, some levels they don't charge at all, and there's a ton of enemy groups, so they barely help you. That's seriously the entire game. You've seen everything. There's almost no platforming, there's no puzzles, and every level is just one narrow pathway with no forks or exploration. All you do is run down empty hallways using basic punches to kill basic enemies. Levels drag on for so long the enemy selection gets monotonous fast, and every fight plays the same regardless of enemy variety. Hang back, memorize attack pattern, punch when they're idle. Repeat for about 10 hours. There's no variety and there's no difficulty curve. There's nothing else here! No, see, we made the game accessible. We wanted to reach out to casual players and show them the PS4 had more than shooters.
So your excuse for utterly abysmal gameplay is that casual players are stupid?
I didn't say that.
You just said exactly that.
My girlfriend, who goes by Taya online, hasn't played video games in years, and since we've been dating, she's picked up and played Mario, Kirby, Lego, and Bomberman games before stretching into Steam puzzle and adventure games. And you know what all those accessible games have in common? They have more gameplay than running through empty halls mashing one button! In fact, Taya couldn't believe that Knack was as bad as I claimed, so she played the first chapter for herself. Her reaction was, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, She was already bored with the limited mechanics, she was pissed off at the broken, unbalanced combat, almost like requiring Twitch gamer reflexes in a game allegedly targeted at non-gamers was a dumb idea, and she was disappointed at the game doing nothing with its fun world, premise, and unique protagonist. Only played the first level and she already caught on to all the game's biggest problems. There are 6 brief stretches where Knack gets alternate forms, but none of these forms do anything. Ice Knack can absorb piles of ice, but it doesn't give you any new powers or attacks, it just increases his size and health bar, exactly the same as if he'd collected relics in a fixed point in the level. And just when you're thinking maybe the ice armor will make you a little stronger or more resilient, wrong-o! Full health, maxed out armor, covered in 5 tons of ice, still dead in 2 hits. The ice form does nothing! Now that's just plain false. In the sequel, Ice Knack will be able to freeze enemies with ice breath.
Really? It took you 3 years after the release of the initial game to come up with the ice form freezes people. Now, not strike that. It took you 3 years after the initial release to come up with the ice form does something.
Then there's Wood Knack, who does the exact same thing as Ice Knack. You get a longer health bar and the enemies immediately rebalance so the armor doesn't do jack, except now you can catch fire, constantly bleed health, and get stranded near enemies who will kill you in 1 hit. There's Stealth Knack, who does nothing but walk through a few laser walls that serve no purpose other than forcing you to use Stealth Knack. And then there's Metal Knack, who does the exact same thing as Ice and Wood Knack, only now there's magnets on the ground that hold you motionless so you can die. These power-ups suck! The game's lone, desperate reach for replay value is a series of upgrades that you can find and equip. Each upgrade is broken into 4 to 7 parts that you find inside blatantly obvious side rooms in the levels. But I played through the entire game, and you know how many upgrades I got? 0! Because when you find a chest, the item that you get is based on random draw, and I'm pretty sure there's way more items than chests in the game. You're damn near guaranteed not to see any upgrades until a second playthrough, and there are alternate Knack skins you'll never see unless you replay it a few more times after that. I am not playing this abusively long, oppressively boring game a second time just to get a few power-ups to make this shitty game slightly easier. The entire game just reeks of laziness. They do absolutely nothing with Knack's powers. Dude's made of a bunch of floating hunks of metal he controls at his will like Magneto, and he seriously can't do anything but walk, jump, and punch. He can't manipulate the floating relics he's made of to fling projectiles, stretch out his limbs, or make weapons. He can grow at his whim, and every single size change is predetermined and doesn't even affect the game. It's well known that Knack was only designed as a nondescript floating blob of crap to show off the PS4's ability to render a high number of discrete objects, and nobody seems to have actually stopped to think about the gameplay or the powers that he should have. You can't complain about the limited gameplay anymore. In the sequel, you can control Knack's size, and he has several new attacks like a shield and a ground pound, so your arguments are invalid.
Congratulations, the sequel allegedly has every dirt simple brain-dead feature that any moron would have put in the first game because you got a tidal wave of complaints. Do you want a cookie?
Your name and your face are stupid.
And we're done.
I know I use this complaint all the time, but the game is ridiculously repetitive and boring. This damn game is, I think, 10 hours long, and it's just a few similar fights repeated endlessly. There's nothing left to talk about. I don't know, maybe the story will have enough material to fill out the rest of the video. The game begins with goblins attacking a human castle with tanks, and the humans organize an expedition to raid the goblins and discover the source of their weapons. The expedition includes Dr. Vargas, a generic scientist with a generic dead wife and no personality, Ryder, an explorer and generic man's man action hero type, Lucas, Vargas's teenage assistant they bring to a war zone for some reason, and Victor, a wealthy industrialist with a Cold Mercy Graves-like bodyguard named Katrina, and an army of robots he'd love to demonstrate on the goblins and sell to the government. Villain. They practically jump out of their skin yelling, "Victor is the bad guy." Before they leave, Vargas shows off Knack, who has a generic overconfident personality and blindly follows any orders the good guys give him the entire game. Our main character barely even qualifies as a character. Knack smashes several of Victor's robots to show his stuff, but Victor is not impressed.
Impressive? He seems a little delicate to me.
Yep, they openly admit how ridiculous it is that Knack can't take any hits. So the gang sets out to explore the goblins' territory. Victor loads a ton of his robots onto a huge carrier, while Knack jettisons all of his relics so he can fit into Vargas's piss-small biplane. They break out this cling-wrap-thin excuse to depower Knack every freaking level. You start every chapter at minimum strength, getting your ass kicked by beetles because Knack either has to shrink to fit in this crappy plane or dump all of his relics to power a door because dense bits of metal floating in a circle power this world's technology somehow. And it never occurs to Vargas to pack a relic sandwich or something so Knack can be useful all the time. The gang splits up, with Vargas and Knack circling through some caves until they get attacked by Victor's robots. They kill the robots, again, and ask Victor why they got attacked. Victor's response is that his robots are so dumb and poorly constructed they can't tell the difference between humans and goblins. And Vargas and Knack both buy it.
You are either lying or you're stupid. I'm stupid. I'm stupid.
They reach the goblin camp, and the adults immediately get captured because if their total inability to kill a floating pile of trash with brittle bone disease didn't clue you in, Victor's robots suck shit. Knack sneaks into the camp, Victor shows up out of nowhere to sick some more robots on Knack, and then it cuts to the main trio where Victor is still captured with Vargas and Ryder. How in the living shitballs did Victor warp clear across the goblin base while pinned down with the other leads? This continuity error is so bad I didn't even realize Victor just tried to kill the one thing that can save his dumb ass from the goblins. Knack stops the goblin leader, and we learn a bit more about their race. Humans forced goblins, who are fully intelligent beings, out of their cities, and now they're forced to live primitive lives in the middle of wastelands. And when the goblin chieftain airs these fairly valid complaints, Ryder and Vargas laugh it off. Is there a bad ending where all of the human characters die? And if there is, how do I get it? Then out of nowhere, Victor kidnaps Lucas. Knack and Vargas storm Victor's castle and discover his evil plan. Victor has discovered massive relics beneath the earth, and he wants to collaborate with the Doctor to explore this massive scientific find and its implication for the future of humanity. He just wants to study the relics with Vargas, and he thinks Knack may be the key to a mysterious door that he found. He only took Lucas to get the Doctor's attention. Victor kidnapped Vargas's assistant to ask politely for his help. And this is where the story's biggest problem creeps in. The entire plot revolves around one of the worst villains in video game history. There is absolutely no reason why Victor should be a villain. He's not out for power or to take over the world. He just wants to work with Vargas to study these new relics and build the world's next generation of technology. Vargas chomps at the bit to study the giant relics. They're his life's work and the greatest scientific discovery in decades. Vargas would have gladly helped Victor find and study more giant relics. Victor doesn't even want to do anything malicious with them. The only reason Vargas says no, and the only reason Victor is a villain, is because the dumb bastard insists on trying to kidnap or murder the doctor's friends instead of just talking to him like anybody with two brain cells to rub together. Victor constantly sabotages his own plans by acting evil for absolutely no reason just so the game's idiot plot can happen. What kills me is they eventually discover warnings that if the door is open, it'll blow up the world. That would have been the perfect opportunity to turn Victor into a sympathetic villain where he presses forward to open the door anyway and the other characters have to stop him. But subtlety and nuance are foreign concepts to this pile of cliches stacked like Lego bricks, so instead we get this moron who stops to shoot himself in the foot every few minutes. Knack, Lucas, and Vargas escape, then break back into Victor's mansion to find the mine, and then escape again. They break into the mine so Vargas can study the relics, but it turns out Knack can't open the door. Yeah, but see, the problem with going exactly where the villain wanted you to go is, yep, they all get captured.
What happens now? But Knack, if you're not the key, then you're far too much trouble to keep around. Take him out!
Oh my God! Stop trying to kill the people who want to help you! Stupid! The next 2 hours or so are blatant padding. Knack fights through a temple to get back to the surface, finding a robot pillar that does nothing and is never explained. He breaks into Victor's house again to rescue Vargas and Lucas. The goblins attack a nearby city for no reason and you have to fight them, and then Vargas's plane gets shot down on the way to the goblin hideout and you spend a whole chapter trying to fix it. There are only 3 lines of relevant exposition over this padding fest. The goblins' weapons come from a green goblin named Gundahar, Ryder knows a cave painting with hints for the door, and the goblins' tanks resemble the designs of Vargas's dead wife Charlotte. Her body was never found after she fell from a narrow bridge she was crossing with no safety equipment in a cave known for earthquakes. So the good doctor has always been a moron. Good to know. They get to the goblin's factory, and of course Charlotte turns up alive. This game is so deathly afraid of plot twists they spell it out a full hour in advance. This cutscene is so stupid I have to break it into chunks for easy digestion. 1. After she fell to her apparent death, Gundahar found her, took her to a secret base, and nursed her back to health. Vargas explains he searched the caves for weeks looking for her, and she blows him off because he never found her. She's pissed that her husband didn't find her in a top-secret goblin base when he had absolutely no way of possibly knowing that she was even missing. 2. Charlotte spent the last 20 years building tanks and warplanes for Gundahar, but now she's quit because, shock, gasp, the goblin warlord who just lost a major war and a ton of land to humans was using that massive fleet of tanks on humans. The hell did she think he'd use them for, playing real-life Rocket League?
Peace won't come. Goblins will rise against humans. We won't rest until every human is dead.
3. They offhandedly mention that there was a war between goblins and humans called the Crystal Wars, which has never been mentioned and will never be explained. The writers figured out that the goblins are more sympathetic than the humans, so they cite lore that doesn't exist to explain why the goblins are evil. Finally, Charlotte's voice actress is wooden as all hell and her face is barely animated. It sinks any emotional resonance that this scene could have had. They blow up Gundahar's fleet. Gundahar abruptly and anticlimactically leaves without a fight, and Vargas and Knack go to look for the key. No sooner do they leave than there's a cutscene where Charlotte talks with Gundahar.
It sounds like you just want my help to exterminate the humans.
No freaking shit, you fucking duds! Oh my god, Charlotte doesn't figure out that Gundahar is evil from his constant push for deadlier weapons, his constant rants about hating humanity, or the fact that he just tried to glass a city. She doesn't figure out he's the bad guy until he tells her straight to her dumb face that he's the bad guy. And if you think I'm blaming the victim here, I'm not. It's never implied that Charlotte is being held captive or forced to build Gundahar's army. As far as the game says, she's staying with the goblins and arming the insane warlord entirely of her own free will. This isn't Stockholm Syndrome. This is just a bizarro world where scientists are the dumbest people on the planet. By the way, you never fight goblins again after this chapter. This entire plotline just drops out of the game at a moment's notice. You could cut out Gundahar and the goblins and the main story with Victor wouldn't change at all. I think they had 2 different scripts with 2 different villains and they just said, screw it, we'll use them both! The key is hidden under Obelisk Mountain, a name you cannot legally use unless Obelisk the Tormentor lives there, which he doesn't, and they have to go through a labyrinth that turns out to just be a few straight hallways with the same monsters you've been fighting for hours. Victor beats them to the mountain, and Katrina tries to kill Knack with poisoned relics that disrupt his powers. You bumble through the next level and boss fight with constantly draining health and an abysmal trudging movement speed, and Knack doesn't think to just pick out or expel the poisoned relics from his body until after the boss fight. Every single character in this game is a complete moron except Lucas. The teenage boy voiced by Spider-Man is the only person who realizes the literal red warning signs explicitly spelling out opening the door will probably kill everyone might just possibly be a bad sign! Oh, and Knack accidentally knocks Katrina's unconscious body into a pool of lava where it completely teleports to a rock on the other side of the room. Damn, don't mock the power of the high ground. Ryder tries to save Katrina, good freaking luck, while the others chase the key to Victor's airship, only to fall down a trapdoor without stopping Victor. Yes, I'll take padding for 600, Alex. Victor uses the key to open the big door and raises Lord Sauron. What, a giant eye atop a pillar that incinerates people with its gaze? I've never watched Lord of the Rings and even I caught the ripoff! Victor's incinerated by Mecha Sauron, and Gundahar dropped straight out of the game, so we're stuck with this anonymous robot pillar as our villain for the final chapter. We never learn a single thing about what this is, where it comes from, why it exists, or why it starts raising relics out of the ground like it's ripping off Transformers and cyberforming the planet. It's just a meaningless metal dong you have to kill to make the game end. This last chapter is basically just you fighting one Guardian enemy a few dozen times, and this thing's patterns are dirt simple. Jump the shockwave, dodge the 3-punch combo, then attack. It's easy as piss to counter, and this is the only real enemy in this chapter. The final boss is really annoying. He keeps spawning turrets that shoot you or cover a massive area in flaming walls, which it then pushes you into. It just abuses every glaring limitation to this shitty game engine, like your poor movement and unreliable dodge. So you kill the pillar orb thing, the game just kinda peters out because this final level came out of nowhere and means nothing. The day is saved, Charlotte comes back to the doctor due to lack of better options. They're all celebrated as heroes even though Charlotte's idiocy directly killed probably hundreds of people by arming the goblins. Ryder and Katrina walk into the sunset together, and the game laughs in your face by having Knack dance to the song How Do You Like Me Now over the credits. I would have picked something much more representative of the game, like, say, Dare to Be Stupid. Knack is your typical tech demo. Every single element of the game has been half-assed to oblivion. The gameplay seems to begrudgingly exist out of contractual obligation with only the bare minimum elements required for functionality and no effort to be made fun or balanced. The story is unbelievably lazy with characters acting like the dumbest people this side of Alien Covenant to advance the plot. There's maybe 4 or 5 legitimately well-written and well-acted character moments, but none of them keep the characters from being flat archetypes, and none of them actually develop the protagonist. Despite Sony's desperate grasping at straws arguments to the contrary, Knack has 0 character development. He's just a drone who follows the orders of whoever's nearby, both at the start and the end of the game. Neither he nor the plot are interesting at all. It's not even a good tech demo. Knack just looks like a floating pile of garbage. This doesn't look impressive unless you're a tech nerd who knows this is supposed to look impressive. The game fails on every level. Sony can bust out whatever excuses or revisionist history with the sequel that they want. This game will suck forever.